research or just travel nursing if you are a nursing student. All right, so brief little introduction. I am currently a pediatric travel nurse. I always wanted to do peds because I am a previous pediatric cancer survivor. And so that's kind of where my heart and soul lies. I'm a dedicated knowledge seeker, which comes with research and careers in science. So quick little question, how many nursing students are here today? Perfect, love it. All right, and then how many people are just here, careers in science? Love it also. Okay, so I'm also an avid traveler. Thus far, I've been to 3 different countries, and I've traveled to, I don't know how many states as of yet. I haven't counted them all. And then lastly, everybody kind of needs a little hobby that keeps them happy and healthy, and that just so happens to be soccer. So yeah, and I played soccer while I was here too. So if there's any soccer players out here, I know what we're going through. Okay, so brief little background about me, like I already said. I was a previous nursing student here, started in the lower division, worked my way up to upper division, and then graduated. During my time here, I was involved in multiple clubs. I was an executive member of the research club, as well as a student research assistant for Dr. Salhorst and Dr. Easley. I was an executive member of the Student Nurses Association. During summers, I was the microbiology lab assistant for Dr. Burke, which I love doing that as well. And then in addition to all that, I worked part-time as a CNA, a home health aide, and then I also worked as a lifeguard at the YMCA here. And I don't say all that to kind of like brag about myself or bolster myself up. I just say all that simply because I want you to know that just getting involved in one club or doing one extra thing is totally feasible and totally possible. You don't have to go above and beyond and do all this extra stuff. You can focus on that one thing and focus on your studies, and it's perfectly doable, okay? And as a matter of fact, I really encourage that simply because the growth and the amount of life lessons that you will learn from that will be far outweigh the time that might take away from your studies. All right, so lastly, how do I get up here today? My freshman year, I was going to my anatomy class for Dr. Salhorst, and I got there a little early because I was going to study because yes, if you haven't figured it out yet, college classes do require a little bit extra study time. So I walked in and I was immediately bombarded by Dr. Easley begging me to have a sandwich and sit down because there was about to be a research club meeting. And I was like, well, I can't turn down food, so I guess I have to stay for the meeting now. And so that's what kind of started all this. So that year, my freshman year, I simply attended Discover USC. I did not present. I was a little bit late to the game in order to do that. And that was also the year I started working as the research assistant and got to know Dr. Salhorst and Dr. Easley a little bit more. My sophomore year, that was the first year I presented. My first presentation was actually in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Southeast American College of Sports Medicine conference. And that was really, really intimidating because unlike Discover USC, Southeast ACSM was graduate and postgraduate level students there. And I was still an undergrad. So I was absolutely terrified. But it was perfect because I got to do that before I went to Discover USC, and then I had my feet under me and kind of knew what I was doing. So then I went to Discover USC, presented there, and then at that same time, I graduated my associate's degree in science with graduation with leadership distinction in the research pathway. My junior year, I presented again at Discover USC, and I also was privileged enough to be able to travel abroad through the Travel Abroad program hosted by Dr. Salhorst and Dr. Easley. I went to Nuremberg, Germany, where I presented at the Second World Congress on Undergraduate Research. And that was such a huge honor. I was representing USC Lancaster, and it was so nice to have like a small little junior college represented at such a grand scale. My senior year was dampened by COVID. So Discover USC that year was virtual. I still submitted and did a virtual presentation. And then I also obtained graduation with leadership distinction in the leadership pathway. Okay, so let's talk about some research and what all that involves. All right, so what life lessons did I gain from being involved in research? Number one, and this comes really helpful with any career in science, and especially as a nurse, I seek my own answers and verify all my own data. So when my techs, my CNAs, they come to me, they tell me something like, hey, this patient's blood pressure is such and such. I'm like, okay, let me go check it and make sure. It also helps me trend my vitals and make sure that I know, okay, this patient's maybe going down the hill because this is what their temperature is doing. This is what their blood pressure is doing. And that comes from putting in data and verifying it yourself. People may have come in before you and placed in those measurements, but you've got to go back and make sure, okay, did they put it in correctly based off of what they wrote down? Next, and I was just talking about this morning, is I try to seek my own answers first. I'm not going to be the person to run to my professor and be like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I got this answer. Can you please explain to me? I'm going to go to Google first, Google Scholar specifically, and then I may go to the library. Let me see what resources I can find there. And then last, I'm going to go to my upper and ask them after I've exhausted everything else. That's when I'm going to go to somewhere else. And I think that's really important because, especially as a nurse, I want to make sure that I've done everything I can do before I run and tell the doctor. Like, I need to make sure, okay, before I tell him, have I gave this medication? Have I tested to make sure that this temperature is accurate? All of those things. You want to make sure you've done everything you can. Second, I have more confidence when I'm speaking to people who are quote unquote above me. And I use those quotes simply because any career in science, and especially as a nurse, you're working as a team. Nobody's above anybody else. It doesn't matter what degree you have. It doesn't matter if you have doctor behind your name. That's irrelevant. All that matters is that you're there to take care of that patient or you're there to take care of that problem. So when I have to call a doctor in the middle of the night and be like, hey, you forgot to put in pain medicine, or hey, I need ibuprofen, this patient's expected fever, I have the confidence to be able to do that and wake them up in the middle of the night. And another addition to a benefit from doing research is I'm constantly growing in my career as an individual. Like I said earlier, being a pediatric cancer survivor, like, this is my passion, this is my livelihood, and I take it very seriously. So I'm not going to put anything else except for like family and simple things like that above my growth. And that's kind of what led me into travel nursing. And we'll get to that. And that kind of goes along with concerning myself with being the best possible nurse, the best possible person I can be. All right, so what is all this hustle and bustle about graduation with leadership distinction? So GLD is an honor added to your diploma after you graduate. So it literally goes on your diploma and it says graduation with leadership distinction. In addition to that, you also get honor cords that you will wear on your graduation day. And just a little hint, if you do get involved in research, you can also get research honor cords. So, just another little incentive to get you involved on campus. But GLD kind of sets you apart because it tells future employers that you went above and beyond the basic necessities for your degree. So I highly, highly, highly encourage it. I've done 2 or 3 job interviews and people have asked me like, hey, what's this GLD? What's graduation with leadership distinction? And I explain to them and tell them what it is, and it usually sparks their interest more. So GLD has the same basic principles for each pathway and for each degree with some minor tweaks in them. So the requirements to obtain GLD include completion of approved courses, which are typically courses already in your chosen degree pathway, participation in enhancement experiences, which coming to this meeting today is considered an enhancement experience. A public presentation, me presenting today is considered a public presentation. So you don't have to do anything super big or go out of your way. It's very simple. And lastly, do an online e-portfolio, which if you guys are interested, and if we have time at the end of the presentation, I can totally show you my online e-portfolio and we can go over all of that. All right, so what does all that culminate into? What did that cause? So essentially what it caused is it caused growth as an undergrad and as a postgraduate student. So research obviously placed me in a leadership role, especially being a research assistant. I was helping those around me. I kind of knew what was happening first and foremost, and then I was kind of the one that people came to afterwards. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. How are we supposed to be doing this? And I would explain, okay, well, we need to do this. first. This is our first step. And as I already kind of touched on, that caused a lot of growth because I was in an uncomfortable situation. I'd never been placed in that kind of situation before. I had never been in a role that people were coming to me first. I'd always been the one going to someone else and asking how to do things. And so that really pushed me and made me uncomfortable, but growth occurs in the discomfort. And I live by that statement. It has never let me down, ever. So if you're uncomfortable right now or in your college classes, trust me, believe me, that's where you're supposed to be. You're growing as a person, you're growing as a human, and you're growing into the future career that you're pursuing. In addition to all of that, you develop a closer relationship with your professors and mentors. I'm close friends now with Dr. Selhorst and Dr. Easley. I know when I first left my staff job, I called Dr. Easley and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help me. And she's always the first one to be like, okay, well, let's take this step by step. Next, the travel abroad program. It wasn't what sparked my interest in travel. I always had an interest in travel, but while we were there, we had chances to go off on our own. And it helped show me that, hey, I can go by myself. I can travel alone. I can do these things by myself and make smart decisions. And I don't need to rely on someone else. And I do travel as a travel nurse by myself now. I don't take anybody with me. I go by myself, which can be intimidating, but the travel abroad helped show me that I was capable of doing that. And last, getting involved as an undergrad, like I've already said probably 1,000 times, it just prepares you for your next phase of life. And it's important in developing important life skills that you'll use later on. And that already gives you a kind of head start. All right, so the nursing students, I'm sure this is probably your favorite part. All right, so how do you become a travel nurse? First and foremost, obtain your ADN or your BSN. I've met several ADN students, so if that's the pathway you're in, that's totally fine too. You need to work at least 1 to 2 years in your preferred specialty, and I cannot emphasize that enough. You need to be able to function completely on your own, independent of anybody else. You don't need to rely on your coworkers, your CNAs, techs, nothing like that. Because when you become a travel nurse, you will go into certain roles and certain positions in certain hospitals where they will consider you to be the end all be all. They will rely on you to get that hard stick. They will rely on you to be the runner of the code, things like that. So just make sure that you're completely comfortable and in your specialty. Don't change and then decide, oh, well, I guess I'll be an ER nurse for a month and then go travel nurse. No. I promise you that's not going to be fun. Next, we are not done researching. So before I started travel nursing, I spoke to travel nurses on my unit that I met. I spoke to 3 or 4 different recruiters and different agencies, and I researched all of them because I had heard several rumors about different ones, such and such as this. Oh, this company isn't good, don't go with them. But I went and verified all of that myself. And next, you kind of need to be open-minded. I went to New Orleans. That was my first spot. New Orleans is the murder capital of the United States, and I'm a single female going there by myself. So I did my research in the area. I made sure that I was living outside of where all the crime was happening. And I went there and I made smart decisions and I didn't see anything bad. I mean, aside from inside the hospital. But other than that, make sure you do your research on where you're going, what hospital you're going to, what are they going to need from you, what system are they using, what charting system are they relying on, all those things. You need to look up all of that. And if you don't know the answers, you can always talk to your recruiter too. Oh wait, and next you just got to go, because I swear that was the hardest part for me. I was terrified of leaving because I'd just been in my little bubble. But like I said before, you got to go outside of your bubble, be uncomfortable, and then get comfortable and then leave again, because that's exactly what happens. All right, so all of that led to growth as a nurse. When I was working my staff job, I took enough time to earn my chemotherapy and biotherapy certification, because as I said, cancer patients are my main population of interest. And then after that, I kind of felt like I was stagnated. I kept asking for the growth opportunities, excuse me, and they weren't being met. I'm joking. All right, I think I'm okay now. So that's kind of what led me to travel nursing. And along with that, my desire to see new places and experience new things. So After that, and you need to be comfortable to ask for those opportunities. Thank you. Yeah. Obviously. All right, much better. Sorry about that. Okay, so after all that, and after I felt stagnated, I decided, okay, it's time to go, time to move on. Let's grow some more. So let's talk about some pros and cons of travel nursing. And as you can kind of see, there's a lot more cons than pros. And that's what I'm talking about when I say like travel nursing is a huge opportunity to grow in your career and grow as a person. And I won't read all of these off, but you know, it's really hard leaving your family for 3 months at a time. You've got to make all new friends. You've got to figure out what your doctors want from you. You've got to figure out, okay, what nurses can I rely on? Because the honest, humble truth is that some nurses are better than others. So, you know, that's kind of the hard part. I mean, obviously the pros are like, the money's good, but we're not just in it for the money. But I do help pay off those student loans. And then the growth, and then just getting to experience new things in different places. All right, so what can we do today? Number one, I challenge each and every single one of you, email one professor, one of your advisors, somebody today. Ask, how can I get involved on campus? If you're interested in research, how can you, who has research opportunities available to me? It's like I've already said a million times. Those experiences are irreplaceable. So I really like, I would love if everybody did that today, because the payoff is way bigger than you can even imagine. Like, I would not trade a thing for my experiences. Oh, thank you. All right. Almost at the end, guys. So if I could go back and give my new grad self one piece of advice, it would be exactly this. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to be able to do everything by yourself. You're going to need to be able to humbly ask for help, which was really hard for me. And you're going to question whether or not you made the right career decision. And that was also hard for me because I knew I'd want to be a nurse from a very young age. And I think I called Dr. Easley and Dr. Salhorst like probably every week crying at least once or twice, because I was so scared that I made the wrong decision and I couldn't do everything that all the more experienced nurses were doing. But it gets so much better. It gets so much better. You kind of get into your groove, you learn how to do things, you figure things out by yourself. And this kind of goes into like the nurses eating their young, you know, don't let anyone take that away from you. Like, this is part of the learning process, and that's perfectly okay. And that's exactly what should be happening. And that's the exact process you should be going through. If you're not questioning yourself and not questioning where you're at, you're probably not challenging yourself enough. And that's the most important thing. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering what type of pediatric cancer did you have?
Yeah, so I had a very rare form of pediatric cancer. So there's two forms. One more thing. There is ALL and there's AML. AML is more common in older adults. ALL is more common in children. I had AML. So the percentages of living have since raised because our treatments have gotten better, but my chances were very slim at that time. However, the treatment length is way shorter for AML. It's usually about like 9 months to a year, whereas for ALL, it's about 3 years. So, you know, there's simple differences between the two, but I was perfectly fine, obviously. Yes, sir.
What was your longest time in research? Like, what was your longest research project?
Probably the SMART study, I'd have to say. I think we did that from the very beginning of the semester all the way through into the next semester. And I think summertime too. We did some research gathering, but I mean, from freshman year on, I was constantly doing something. I think I was involved in like 3 different studies, just at different intervals. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, what kind of research did you do?
Okay, that's a great question. So what kind of research did I do? As I was working with Dr. Salkehatchie and Dr. Easley, their kind of focus is in exercise physiology, so I was in the exercise physiology lab. I did a lot of body measurements, health indicators, that sort of thing. Yes, sir. The what? Oh. So English is kind of the international language. So most of the people I ran into, if they didn't speak it fluently, they had enough know-all of the English language to understand it. And Google Translator, you can download that app on your phone and it will literally, like, you can put your camera on a sign and it will translate it for you. So that was definitely key. Next. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Okay, let's see. Okay, within the United States or outside? Outside, I went to Brazil. Absolutely loved Brazil. Cannot recommend Brazil enough. The food's great, people's great. They party all the time. It's amazing. Anybody else? Yes.
So, my mom was in the hospital recently and I was talking with some of the nurses at that hospital and they were saying that there's resentment from the, like local nurses against the travel nurses because the travel nurses are making so much more money than the local nurses. So have you dealt with any of that and how do you deal with that?
That's a really great question. I myself have not run into any of that. At my staff job, being a staff nurse myself, I didn't hold any resentment, but there were some of the nurses who I met who felt that way. So that's another thing. Typically, if you were the travel nurse, you are going to get the crappy assignment. So if they've got a patient they've known forever that's combative, they throw things at you, that's the patient you're probably going to get. Simply because they need a break. The staff nurses need a break. It might not be because like they're holding anything over you, it's just because the staff is so tired of it. But I haven't experienced like anything being mean to me or anything like that, no. Yes, sir.
Not from me, from Colin from in this virtual audience. What is the yearly pay for a travel nurse?
Okay, so I can't really tell the yearly pay simply because each contract is different. So coming from a staff job, my first contract, I was making about double what I was making as a staff nurse. And now my next contract, I'm making about triple what I was making as a staff nurse. So it varies. It depends on, like, you have to compromise. It may not be a location that you want, but that's where the higher pay is going to be, as opposed to if it's a really location that everybody wants to go to, the pay is going to be lower because they can find people to fill the position faster. So.
Are you paid by the hour or salary?
So we get hourly pay and then you also get your stipend. So your hourly pay is taxable pay and that's where taxes come out of. Whereas your stipend for food, housing, and travel, that's non-taxable and that's where you make your money. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so it kind of depends on what your field of study would be. Like, I'm a nurse, I'm not involved in exercise physiology, but I found bridges into that. So like health indicators. Okay, so we're talking BMI, we're talking about height, weight, we're talking about wrist, grip strength, all of those things kind of led into nursing. There are some people who do literature research. There are people who do, I know Dr. Lee Kai does research. I think it's in chemistry or biology, one of those. Sorry, I haven't been here in a while. And then Emily Lehman, she was here and she was involved in research, and I can't remember exactly what her pathway is, but any of your professors who are in your degree pathway, I think it's part of their requirements that they have to do certain types of research and meet certain parameters. So talk to them and they may be able to guide you better. Also, because we are a USC affiliate, if they don't have the opportunity here, they probably know somebody on the USC campus who's doing something in your field. Anybody else? I knew you were going to do that. Yes.
What is your favorite part of the research process?
Oh, definitely presenting. I mean, you've done all this hard work, you've done all the data collection, you've done all the data analysis, you asked your question, you figured out the answer to that, and now you've got to go present it and be like, this is what I did and how I did it. Be proud of me. So that's definitely my favorite part. You got to get over sitting and talking in front of people. That becomes easier and easier the more and more you do it. So yeah, definitely presenting. Yeah.
I was going to say, how many times did you cry for that first presentation that we had to talk you through? But we'll let another, because it always gets over and it's always
Mhm.
better, right?
Yeah.
And now you love it. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fabulous. But do you have to do research in your own discipline? Is it good to do research outside of your discipline?
Absolutely, simply because, so the question was, is it good to do research outside of your own discipline? And I would say yes, absolutely, because it gives me a different perspective looking in now. Since I did research in exercise physiology, I look at my patients differently. I kind of look at them more holistically rather than just, okay, this person has this diagnosis, but I'm looking at it more like, okay, what are our other compounding factors here that we have going on? Because I was into the health indicators and that sort of thing. And it helps show you a different view and a different side of thing. You know, a lot of times we get into this like hyper focused, okay, let me focus on this one thing. We get very myopic, whereas we need to be looking at the broader picture, and that's helpful in any career. Yes.
Another question from things here is advice for undergrad students struggling.
Okay, so if you are struggling, I would first look at our study methods. How are we studying, and is it the correct study method for your chosen career path? Because it's hard when you are a visual learner to just read something and try to comprehend it. Like, let's look at, okay, do we need to look at diagrams or do we need to like read our book? So look at that first. And then secondly, if you're still struggling with that, go to your advisor, go to your professors, ask them like, hey, this is what I'm currently doing. What would you recommend me to do? And then if you're still struggling, let's consider our next options, and not like changing our degree pathway or anything, but like, let's look at, okay, we've looked at study methods. Okay, is there something that is taking me away from my studies that I may need to minimize more, if that's a possibility? If not, then I'm sure your advisors are going to be more helpful than I can. Those are the two real solutions that I have. But they may be able to tell you more than I can. Anybody else? I love the questions. Keep them coming. Yes. So I've been a travel nurse. I'm about to go on my second contract. But the only reason it's my second contract is because I extended while I was in New Orleans. So I was there for 5 months, almost 6, instead of just 3. So I probably could have been on my second contract, but I've just done 1 because I extended. But I've been a nurse for 2.5 years now. Yes. Yes. So I've run into that twice. The first time was because the adjustment period, if you're used to like being in your bubble and knowing everybody around you and knowing where you're going, it is shocking. Like it takes you some getting used to. And that's really hard to cope with. And the second time was because a nurse, she'd only been a nurse for, I think, 9 months, and she traveled and she came to our unit, which is we have some sick kids on our unit, and she could not figure anything out. I mean, you've got to learn a charting system. You've got to learn new pumps if they have different types of IV pumps. You've got to learn a whole new way of giving antibiotics. Like, pharmacies run differently. It's a lot to get used to. So I have run into that twice now. Yes. No. Yeah, absolutely. So as a matter of fact, that kind of brings up a good point. One, you can do local travel nursing. So as long as you're 50 miles out from even your home hospital or whatever, you can do travel nursing there. When I chose to extend in New Orleans, they offered that to me. So if the hospital is offering it, then sure, you can extend for, I mean, you can only extend for so long. I think it's about a year, and then you're considered like staff, so you have to leave. But there's also hospitals within that same area, so you can just travel to the next hospital within that area. So like I was at Ochsner, they also had Chinola, which was right around the corner. I could have traveled there if I chose to. Yes. Yeah, so my recruiter, what generally happens is they have a list of all these different hospitals and all these different travel jobs. And you can pick and choose. You say, I'm interested in, I don't know, Kansas. Submit to Kansas. And then Kansas, they have different applicants. So like, let's say 5 people apply to Kansas, they may or may not pick you. They may or may not interview. So like when I went to New Orleans, I was interviewed, I went and had an in-person orientation. Whereas when I'm going up to Connecticut, I have had no interview, haven't spoke to a soul in Connecticut, and my orientation is all online. And then your recruiter will also send specific job opportunities to you. So if like, hey, I've had several nurses up in Arizona. They love Arizona. Is that somewhere you're willing to go? And you say yes or no. I've also turned down places like, I'm not really interested in going anywhere cold. So I'm not looking to go to Montana. So I roll that out. She doesn't send me places to Montana. But then it's really, you're in control as a travel nurse. Like you say yes or no, and you say when, and you say kind of say how. It's more when you get the contract that you're limited, because like your schedule's picked for you. You don't get to pick what holidays you're off unless it's written in your contract. So they're in control after you accept. And then, like I said, you may or may not get an interview. It just depends. Anybody else? Any questions about upper division? Any questions? Yes. Question?
Just want to say, Kailey, before everybody gets away, we want to get a group picture.
Okay. Perfect. Any questions about nursing school? Any questions about getting involved?
One more here.
Yeah.
Asking, how does your family deal with you being a traveler?
Okay. When I told them I was going to New Orleans, I think 5 people offered to get me a stun gun, mace, or tried to get me my concealed carry. So they were real concerned about that one. And of course, like your family and your friends, they miss you, but I have it worked out to where once a month, either I fly home or I have one of my family or friends come up to visit me. And that kind of gives me like the comfort of at least once a month I get to see somebody, or once a month I get to come back home and be in my little comfort bubble. My boyfriend obviously doesn't want me to go, but he's supportive of it because he knows that I'm passionate about traveling. I'm passionate about growing as a person and as a nurse. And so they're all willing to let me go because I know those things are important to me, but they still miss me. And we do like FaceTime calls. I call my mom all the time. Like I call my mom when I'm going to work, sometimes when I get into work and I'm having my lunch, sometimes when I'm leaving work, like, you know, you just stay in contact. And that helps kind of ease things and ease the transition for sure. Anything else? Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. I'm so glad you guys all came out, and I hope I, put a little seed in your brain to maybe get involved in something. I don't care what it is, if it's research, something. But yeah, perfect.